Welcome to this new workshop, the fourth in the series that Temas is conducting on the wave of sustainability-related regulatory changes coming from Europe. I'm Miguel Varela, founder of Temas, and I'll be guiding you through this session as we explore one of the most impactful regulations affecting us all, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or CSDDD. In today's workshop, we'll cover 7 key points to give you practical insights into the directive's requirements and how to implement them in your organization. We'll start with a basic overview of what the CSDDD is, its purpose and vision. 2. Companies affected. Here we'll discuss the companies that fall under directive scope both within and outside the European Union. The third part we'll call about the roadmap. This section will outline the timeline for implementing the directive. In duties, we'll explore the main obligations companies face under the CSDDD. CSDDD and global heating. This section will look at how the directive connects to climate action, greenhouse gas emissions, and European climate goals. CSDDD and waste will discuss how the directive indirectly impacts waste management connected to European circular economy goals and Scope 3 emissions. And now what? Where do I start? I will provide a practical 4-step guide for getting started with the CSDDD in your organization. Finally, we'll also share some useful references for those who want to learn more. Let's dive into it. 25 July 2024, the Directive on Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence, Directive 2024/1760 or CSDDD, entered into force. The CSDDD introduced a corporate due diligence duty for large companies to identify, prevent, and mitigate the negative impact of their activities on human rights, such as child labor, and the environment, such as pollution, in their own operations and those of their related businesses and in their chain of activities or chain of value. That is one of the most important things to remark from these directives, the holistic vision. Companies have the duty of care for their impacts not only within their own walls. They have to take care of the activities of their subsidiaries and the business partners that set up their value chains. We are talking about suppliers, manufacturers, sales partners, distributors, transporters, storage companies, contractors, etc. Companies affected. For companies based in the European Union, this directive affects to about 6,000 large companies. Those that have more than 1,000 employees and more than 450 million euros turnover, and for non-European Union based companies, the criteria is related solely to the turnover. So the companies affected are those with more than 450 million euros in the European Union market. Around 900 companies, more or less. Small and medium enterprises, SME, are not directly affected by the due diligence directive, but there's a trick. They should be aligned with this standard if they are part of the value chain of a large company as a supplier, contractor, business partner, reseller, manufacturer, etc. This is one of the most hot or controversial issues. The possible administrative burden that implementing this directive might place on companies, especially in the smaller ones. Published in the official journal of the European Union on 5th of July and entering the forum 25 of July 2024. In 2 years, Member States have to transpose the directive into national law. In 3 years, we are talking about 26 of July 2027, the rules will start to apply to companies, starting with large European Union companies with more than 5,000 employees and more than 1,500 million euros of turnover generated worldwide, and of course non-European companies with more than 1,500 million euros of turnover generated in the European market. In 4 years, 26 of July 2028, it's time for European-based companies with more than 3,000 employees and 900 million euros of worldwide turnover, and non-European companies with more than 900 turnover generated in the European Union market. And in 5 years, 26 of July 2029, all other companies in the scope. So the clock is ticking and there's no time to lose. Companies affected by the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive CSDDD must face some obligations following this 6-step procedure. First, they have to integrate due diligence into corporate policies and management systems. Companies must integrate sustainability commitments into their corporate policies, fostering a culture of responsibility. This includes developing and regularly reviewing policies to ensure respect for human rights and environmental standards across all operations. Second, identify and assess adverse impacts on human rights and the environment. In this step, companies must identify potential negative impacts on human rights and the environment in their own operations and across their supply chain, focusing on the most serious and likely risks. Third, prevent, mitigate and seize adverse impacts. Companies must take action to prevent potential impacts, mitigate risk, and seize any negative impacts that are already occurring. Actions can include adjusting business practices or requiring changes from suppliers. 4. Track implementation and results. Companies may monitor the effectiveness of their due diligence actions through continuous assessment and regularly reviewing the impact of policies in a process of continuous improvement. 5. Communicate how impacts are being addressed. The CSDDD requires transparency in communicating due diligence policies. Companies must publicly report their efforts and results in sustainability, meeting the requirements of the Sustainability Reporting Directive CSRD. Just a reminder, we held a dedicated workshop on the CSRD, which you can check out at tsunami.teimas.com. And the sixth step, provide for or cooperate in remediation of adverse impacts. When the company has caused a negative impact, it is obliged to provide or cooperate in addressing the damage, whether through compensation or supporting mediation and conflict resolution processes. These 6 steps create a structured ongoing process for due diligence, focusing on continuous improvement and transparency in a company's impact. CSDDD and global hit. And CSDDD positions companies as essential contributors to the European Union's climate goals, which include achieving climate neutrality by 2050 and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. One of the most important aspects of this directive is that companies must develop climate transition plans that align their strategies with the Paris Agreement, which aims to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. These plans outline steps to reduce emissions across operations, trying to ensure that companies continuously work toward limiting their contributions to climate change. A defining feature of the CSDDD is its focus on supply chain accountability. Companies are now required to address not only their direct emissions but also those within their supply chain, Scope 3 emissions. Of course, transparency is critical, and companies must track and report their climate actions. The CSDDD requires companies to share publicly how they are addressing their climate impact in line with European Union reporting standards like the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This transparency promotes accountability and supports continuous improvement. Adaptation and remediation. Where companies contribute to adverse climate impacts, they must remediate by reducing emissions or adopting offsetting measures. This might involve investing in cleaner technology or adopting carbon capture practices to address unavoidable emissions. Finally, following the CSDDD brings companies strategic advantages, enhancing their reputation with eco-conscious consumers and investors. It also helps mitigate climate-related risks like supply chain disruptions, aligning environmental responsibility with business resilience. Through these mandates, the CSDDD makes companies critical to the European Union's climate objectives, fostering a sustainable transformation that benefits both the environment and the economy. CSDDD indirectly influences waste management by requiring companies to consider and mitigate environmental impacts and risks through their operations. While the directive does not set explicit waste-related targets, it aligns with the European Union's sustainability goals, like those in the European Green Deal and Circular Economy Action Plan. The CSDDD mandates companies to identify and mitigate potential environmental impacts. This process includes assessing risk associated with resource use and pollution, which often involves waste-related issues. By identifying these risks, companies are motivated to implement strategies that reduce waste as part of their broader environmental goals, contributing to a more resource-efficient economy. There's a direct link between waste and climate change mitigation as well. By reducing waste and adopting resource-efficient practices, companies can effectively lower their Scope 3 emissions, supporting these climate targets. What's next? The OECD provides a support guide for the implementation of the due diligence concept in companies. Here we have a 4-step plan to launch CS3D in your company. First, understand requirements and set policies. Start by reviewing the CS3D requirements to understand their impact on your operations and supply chain. Update your policies to include sustainability due diligence and assign responsibilities to key departments like compliance and procurement. Conduct risk and impact assessments. Identify and assess potential human rights and environmental risk across your operations and supply chains, prioritizing high-impact areas like emissions and resource sourcing. Use this assessment to shape proactive measures for addressing risk in critical areas. Integrate due diligence and climate plans. Embed due diligence into core business processes and create a climate transition plan. This plan should target Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, emphasizing waste reduction and efficient resource use. Set measurable goals and timelines to guide implementation. Finally, report progress. Transparently establish a transparent reporting system in line with relevant standards such as the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD. Regular updates on sustainability efforts and risk management build accountability and trust with stakeholders. So this 4-step plan provides a clear, structured approach to implementing CS3D principles. To support you in your journey to implement the CS3D, we share with you some key references on this last slide. These materials will help you deepen your understanding of due diligence processes, risk assessment, and sustainability reporting. As we finish this workshop on CS3D, I want to thank you all for your interest and participation. This directive is a big step in aligning business practices with European sustainability goals, and understanding these requirements will be essential for companies that want to lead responsibly. Remember that you can find other workshops from this series available at tsunami.teimas.com. I also encourage you to stay tuned, as we'll be soon organizing a new workshop, this time on the upcoming European regulation on waste shipments. Thank you once again for joining us today. See you in the next workshop.
Thank you.